Get back in control with Off the Wagon, adventures in emotional eating, health, and weight loss. Each episode containing fork-sized mindset tweaks, perspective shifts, and lifestyle hacks to get you back on the wagon. Whether it's habit change, emotional eating, addictions, weight loss, willpower, or relationships, there's something here for you. So let's get on the wagon and get down the road to your goals with me, Christy R. Hall. Welcome to episode 41, where today we're talking about labels and diagnoses. This week I've been thinking a lot about labels, all kinds of labels. The positive ones that we apply to ourselves, like happy or recovered, and the negative ones that we apply to ourselves, like disorganized or addicted. I've also been thinking about those labels applied to us by others, often called diagnoses, and how they mold our actions and our behaviors and our beliefs about ourselves and our outcomes. A client of mine, we'll call him Greg, had some health concerns. He has a series of symptoms and ailments. Some came and went, others popped up in their place, and all the time he worked diligently to manage those symptoms and resolve any underlying causes. He started cleaning up his diet and eating better. He started walking more. He even got better control of his diabetes. He was so proud of himself. And what was interesting about his symptoms and various ailments was that they were so common. You could go to Dr. Google and most of his symptoms would come up for a majority of illnesses. I mean, fatigue can be a sign of not enough sleep or a sign and symptom of the common cold. It can be a sign of Epstein-Barr or hepatitis. The same can be said for half a dozen of the symptoms each of us encounters each and every day. Group them one way, they look like a simple cold. Group it another, and all of a sudden you've got a diagnosis and a label of an incurable disease. So back to Greg. Some routine blood work provided some abnormal results, which required more tests. Those tests led to more doctors and eventually a diagnosis of cancer. Now, I know that cancer is a scary thing. I've lost several family members to cancer. And what happened to Greg after he was diagnosed happens to a lot of people after they're diagnosed. One week we met and he said, "As soon as I tell anyone that I have cancer, it's like all they see after that is the cancer. They no longer see Greg, only the cancer. When they ask me how I'm doing or what I'm up to, it's in relation to the cancer or the chemo. It's as if the cancer is the person and I'm the tumor, not the other way around." And there is a difference, I think, between seeing your symptoms or even a diagnosis as something you have at the moment or something that you are manifesting in your current experience rather than something that you are. This is oftentimes why I prefer to work with folks who don't have their diagnoses yet. They're still open-minded about their experience. They still treat symptoms and ailments individually, which makes them much easier to address and manage without feeling overwhelmed. Once they get labeled with some sort of disease or syndrome, it gets so much harder to shift things and make progress because they will have taken all of these smaller symptoms and glued them together with this glue called chronic fatigue or Hashimoto's or fibromyalgia, or you get what I'm saying. But the same thing happens with non-biological issues. When your doctor diagnoses you with generalized anxiety disorder, you begin to call yourself an anxious person. Before, you may have only gotten anxious in groups of people or in unfamiliar situations, which would be perfectly normal. But now you say you've got GAD or social anxiety disorder. Language wise, do you realize that I've got a social anxiety disorder is really no different than I've got green eyes, or I've got brown hair, or I've got freckles? And let me ask you, can you really do anything about your green eyes, or your brown hair, or your freckles? And if you can't do much about those things, then why would you be able to do anything about your social anxiety disorder? The important difference that I'm trying to point out here is that one is an event, the other is a state of being. Having a panic attack is an event. Having a panic disorder is a state of being. Being anxious about a party is an event. Calling yourself an anxious person or identifying yourself as having generalized anxiety disorder is again a state of being. And by embracing that diagnosis, that label, by putting it on your name tag, hi, I have GAD, you probably fail to recognize all the moments when you're not anxious, when you feel relaxed or calm or loving. The same thing goes for binge eating, emotional eating, stress eating, overeating. To be honest, these sorts of labels like emotional eater are really just a shorthand way to reference the group of issues or symptoms that we're talking about. So, emotional eating, for our purposes, is eating in an attempt to feel positive emotions or in an attempt to not feel negative emotions, or eating in response to a stressful or heightened emotional situation or event, or disconnecting from your body while eating in a way that allows you to eat past the point of fullness. Emotional eating as a title or a label is a much quicker way to say that than to go over each of those things each and every time. It's a shortcut reference that over time, when you travel in similar circles, you basically learn the rough definitions. And as we travel, looking for tribes or clans of like-minded individuals, we use those same words and definitions to help others define us and label us and ensure that we fit those requirements in order to be in their group. And you may have experienced this yourself, where you have to conveniently omit or not mention one or two symptoms or behaviors that you have. Otherwise, you don't fit in with the group, and they either won't allow you in or they will kick you out. For example, if you mention that you're still following a diet, right? And when I say diet, I mean a way of eating, even if it's not a calorie restriction plan. You very often will get booted out of most intuitive eating or normal eating groups. And if you're not kicked out, you're going to get an onslaught of opinions and directives as to why you should give up the diet mentality. And I understand the draws of community and feeling like you're not alone in your struggles. I also understand that sometimes there is a certain amount of relief that's found when we've been working so very hard to try and identify and label and neatly package what's not working for us and why our bodies aren't doing what we think they should be doing. And sometimes we're just really grateful that someone else can label it and package it and neatly tie it up for us in a bow, and they know what's wrong with us and they can hopefully help us with it. But I've also seen people who use those labels, those diagnoses, as an excuse to continue their behavior or to stop trying to change or stop trying to get better. They say, oh, well, I have social anxiety disorder, so I can only go to this event for 2 hours and it justifies this doctor prescribed Klonopin. Or I'm an emotional eater, so binge eating is just what I do. I can't help myself. You'll just have to get over it. These words, these phrases, these beliefs about yourself and your capabilities increase the likelihood that you're going to continue to have anxiety issues at parties that, you know, may eventually cause you to stay home altogether instead of going out, or that may cause you to continue to binge uncontrollably. Once you start labeling yourself with any sort of label, or even entertaining the idea of a label, I call it trying a label on, your mind is going to begin to look for all the instances, all the behaviors, all the thoughts, and all the beliefs you have to back that thought up. This is really potentially dangerous. And let me give you an example, and this is from my own life. I was recently watching a show on Amazon Prime called Undone. It takes the viewer on a schizophrenic adventure. It's entertaining, and the art style is different, and I really like it. And by the way, that's not a spoiler because they talk about schizophrenia pretty early on. So I wanted to refamiliarize myself with the symptoms of schizophrenia. So I headed over to Google and I started reading through the symptoms, right? Delusions, hallucinations, disorganized thinking, disorganized motor behavior, and other negative symptoms. And on the surface, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I see where they're going. But then I started to read deeper, right? Delusions, false beliefs that are not based in reality. For example, you think that certain gestures or comments are directed at you. And I thought, everyone has had one of those moments where they thought that a look or a comment was about them when it really wasn't. Hallucinations. These usually involved hearing or seeing things that don't exist. Hallucinations can be any of the senses, but hearing voices is the most common hallucination. And I thought, but wait, doesn't everyone have a running monologue of chatter going on in their heads? I know I do. Disorganized thinking. Disorganized thinking is inferred from disorganized speech. Effective communication can be impaired, and answers to questions may be partially or completely unrelated. Now, who hasn't had a moment where they couldn't put their sentences together as quickly as their mind was working on the problem and thus sounded like a complete idiot? Disorganized motor behavior. Childlike silliness to unpredictable agitation. Behavior isn't focused on a goal, so it's hard to do tasks. Behavior can include resistance to instructions, a complete lack of response, or useless and excessive movements. So, fidgeting, or ignoring, or choosing not to do something. We've all done that. And finally, negative symptoms. This refers to reduced or lack of ability to function normally. For example, the person may neglect personal hygiene or appear to lack emotion. Also, the person may have lost interest in everyday activities, socially withdraw, or lack the ability to experience pleasure. So if I skip brushing my teeth, or decide not to go to the movies, or if I'm suffering from social anxiety disorder and choose not to go to a party, I've got negative symptoms. Now, I get it, right? Isolated events mean nothing. And I understand you have to experience these things for 6 or more months and experience 2 or more of these symptoms. My point is that how easy is it? You're reading through this list of symptoms to identify with something and then all of a sudden find yourself questioning whether or not you too are schizophrenic. Don't misunderstand me. I want to be clear. You should definitely visit your doctor if you are concerned about your physical, emotional, or mental health. You should listen to what your healthcare providers advise, but ultimately realize that the decisions you make regarding your health are yours. And you should do the best that you can to understand that whatever label or diagnosis they give is really more of a shortcut way to reference your symptoms. Now, I know I use the language a lot, right? As emotional eaters, or as binge eaters, or as stress eaters. Don't get married to the label. Don't add it to your name tag. Don't add it to the string of letters after your last name, like PhD. Don't wear it like a badge of honor. So my mission for you today, should you choose to accept it, is to sit down and look at all the things that you label yourself with. Obsessive, compulsive eater, emotional eater, sensitive, highly sensitive person, anxious, high-strung, high maintenance. Make a list of all the positive labels too. Creative, resourceful, ambitious, persistent, compassionate, friendly, whatever it is. Then, really think about how those labels help you or hinder you. For the ones that are hindering you, see if you can reframe them. See if you can separate yourself from it and get specific about it. For example, let's say you identify as being an anxious person. Instead of being an anxious person, perhaps you can start saying you have anxious moments and start looking for and noticing moments when you aren't anxious. Instead of being a binge eater, perhaps you are a person who occasionally binge eats, and notice that a majority of the time you actually aren't binge eating. Instead of being an emotional eater, maybe you are a person who sometimes eats when they are sad or angry or feeling rejected. And notice that you don't eat when you're feeling another emotion. So maybe you're a person who eats when they're sad, but you don't eat when you're angry. Or maybe you're a person who eats when you are angry, but you don't eat when you're feeling sad or stressed. Or maybe you are a person who eats when they're stressed, but you don't eat when you're happy or sad. When you separate yourself from the label, it instantly becomes manageable again, something that you can do something about. Further, when you get specific about it, instead of these large and sweeping generalizations, the problem doesn't seem quite as overwhelming. After all, managing the occasional instance of emotional eating should be relatively easy. While if that's the only way you ever eat, well, isn't it going to be a little bit more difficult to do? I hope that has been helpful for you today. I hope that the mission, the assignment, has been clear. If you have any questions or any concerns or would like to talk to me about the labels that you have given yourself, right? The diagnoses that you may have been saddled with, or that someone you love may have saddled you with, I would love to talk to you. You can find me on Facebook at fb.me/Coach Christy R. Hall, or at my website, www.christyrhall.com. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.